They called him Gaspipe, a name that sent chills down the spines of even the toughest criminals in New York. In a world where power, loyalty, and betrayal determined who lived and who died, Anthony Casso carved out a reputation as one of the most feared and brutal figures in organized crime. But how did he rise through the ranks? And how did a man so ruthless and calculating eventually fall from power? This is the terrifying and fascinating story of Anthony Gaspipe Casso, a mobster whose cunning and brutality made him both admired and despised in the underworld. The making of a monster. Born on May 21, 1942 in Brooklyn, Anthony Casso didn't just stumble into a life of crime. He was practically born into it. His father, Michael Casso, worked at the docks but had deep ties to the Genovese crime family. And his godfather? A powerful mafia captain named Salvatore Calabriano. This meant young Anthony grew up surrounded by mobsters, learning the ways of the underworld before he even hit his teenage years. Now, about that nickname, Gaspipe. His father earned it first, always carrying a short lead pipe for protection. Anthony eventually inherited both the name and the reputation that came with it. And trust me, he lived up to it. Ditching school for the streets. While most kids were worried about homework and baseball, Anthony was more interested in hustling and making connections. He dropped out of school at just 16 years old, and thanks to some shady paperwork, landed a job at the docks. But that wasn't nearly enough for him. He had bigger ambitions. He started running with the South Brooklyn Boys, a local gang known for small-time crimes and street fights. But Anthony wasn't just another tough kid. He was smart, ruthless, and always looking for an edge. It didn't take long before he caught the attention of some serious players in the mob. One of them was Christopher "Christy Tick" Ferrari, a respected member of the Lucchese crime family. Christy saw potential in Anthony, not just as muscle, but as a problem solver. And in the Mafia, problem solvers get noticed. A taste for violence. Anthony quickly climbed the ranks, proving that he was willing to do whatever it took to make a name for himself. And at just 19 years old, he shot a man for harassing a woman in his neighborhood. The guy survived, but the incident nearly sparked a mob war between rival families. Luckily for Anthony, his father and godfather stepped in, paid off the right people, and made sure the case disappeared. That's when he learned a valuable lesson. In the underworld, everything has a price. From that point on, he was always armed, always watching his back, and always ready to strike first. From street hustler to mafia heavyweight, by his early 20s, Anthony was running truck hijacking scams, robbing high-end jewelry stores, and even cracking open bank vaults. He led a crew that used military-grade equipment to disable alarms and steal millions in cash and valuables. But his real money came from the drug trade. By the early 70s, he was smuggling marijuana and cocaine into the U.S. through a network of fishing boats, warehouses, and even private planes. And the profits? Massive. Of course, big money attracts big problems, like law enforcement. But Anthony had an ace up his sleeve. Cops on the payroll. If you thought Anthony just bribed a few cops here and there, think bigger. He had high-ranking NYPD detectives and even an FBI informant feeding him information. Two of his most notorious assets? Louis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa, NYPD detectives who became known as the Mafia Cops. They weren't just looking the other way, they were helping the mob eliminate enemies. Whenever the feds planned a raid or were closing in on a suspect, Anthony knew before they did. This level of power and influence made him nearly untouchable. The climb to Mafia royalty. By the mid-1970s, Anthony was officially made into the Lucchese crime family. His loyalty, intelligence, and sheer brutality earned him a spot right next to his closest ally, Vittorio "Vic" Amuso. Together, they ran massive drug operations, extortion rings, and high-profile hits. But Anthony wasn't just playing defense, he was taking over. He eliminated rivals, expanded operations, and made sure the money kept flowing. His influence within the Lucchese family skyrocketed, and many believed he was on track to become the boss himself. The beginning of the end. In the late 80s and early 90s, federal investigations into organized crime ramped up. Wiretaps, undercover informants, and increased pressure from law enforcement started cracking the mob's foundation. Anthony found himself in the crosshairs. The fall of Gaspipe. Unlike other mafia informants, Anthony was too dangerous to be fully trusted. His violent history and lack of remorse made prosecutors hesitate to cut him a deal. In the end, his cooperation fell apart, and instead of witness protection, he got life in prison. He died behind bars in 2020, but his legacy as one of the most ruthless and feared figures in organized crime still lingers. The rise. From small-time hustler to mafia powerhouse. By the early 1980s, the Lucchese crime family was feeling the heat. New racketeering laws were putting bosses behind bars, and informants were popping up left and right, threatening to dismantle entire families from within. But Casso, he saw the opportunity. His biggest power move came when he partnered with Murat Balagula, a Soviet emigre running a massive gasoline tax scam. The power play and the paranoia. By the late 80s, Casso had solidified his control, even though he technically wasn't the boss. When Tony Ducks Corallo was convicted, Casso strategically pushed for Vica Musso to take the top spot while he remained the consigliere, wielding immense power without the title that painted a target on his back. The betrayals and the bloodbath. While Casso and Musso were fugitives, the Lucchese family fell into chaos. A violent crackdown on suspected informants led to a wave of killings, including a botched hit on longtime enforcer Peter "Fat Pete" Chiodo. Shot over a dozen times, Chiodo miraculously survived and flipped on Casso. Furious, Casso did something unheard of. The fall, arrest, betrayal, and a 455-year sentence. The man who had spent years outmaneuvering cops and rivals finally met his match. In January 1993, Casso was arrested. Some say he was tracked by a cell phone signal. Others believe someone close to him gave him up. Either way, Gaspipe was done running. Even behind bars, he tried to manipulate the system. The final chapter. Even in prison, Casso's life was marked by suffering. His wife, Lillian, who had stood by him for years, fell victim to extortion from his enemies. Stress and isolation wore him down. Legacy. The rise and fall of Gaspipe Casso. Anthony Casso was one of the most ruthless figures in mafia history. He was intelligent, cunning, and willing to break even the most sacred mafia rules to maintain power. His brutality made him feared, but in the end, it also made him vulnerable. By targeting the families of informants, he shattered long-standing mafia codes. In the end, Gaspipe Casso, once one of the most feared men in the mafia, died alone, powerless, and forgotten, just another fallen king in the underworld. Thanks for watching. Please like the video, press the subscribe button, and also drop your thoughts in the comment section.